The silent stalker. It was a moonless night when David decided to venture into the abandoned train yard. He had heard the rumors about the place, the kind of urban legends people whispered about late at night. Stories of shadows moving between derelict train cars, of inhuman sounds echoing through the rusted corridors. But David, ever the skeptic, was here to prove it was all nonsense. Or so he thought. The train yard was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of the city, distant car horns or the hum of streetlights, were conspicuously absent. The only noise was the crunch of gravel under David's boots and the occasional groan of metal as the wind pushed against the forgotten train cars. Then came the sound, a low, guttural scraping noise, like nails dragging across rusted steel. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the creaks of a yard. But as David pressed on, it grew louder, more deliberate, closer. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice bouncing off the empty cars. Silence, and then a whisper, not words, but a sound like dry leaves crackling in the wind. It seemed to come from all directions, carried on the stale air. David spun around, his flashlight darting over graffiti-covered walls and twisted heaps of scrap metal. That's when he saw it. Crouched atop an overturned train car was the rake. Its gaunt, pale body gleamed faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the gaps in the clouds. Its skin stretched tightly over angular bones, making it look more skeletal than living. Its limbs were unnaturally long, ending in talon-like claws that scraped against the car's surface. Its face was worse, hollow, black eyes that seemed to drink in the light, and a wide, lipless mouth filled with jagged teeth. It didn't move. It just stared, its head tilted slightly, as if studying him. David froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The rake let out a guttural hiss and leapt down with a deafening clang. Its claws tore through the metal as it landed, standing upright and towering over him. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. David bolted. He ducked between train cars, his heart pounding as he sprinted blindly through the maze of rusted steel. The sound of snapping debris and guttural snarls echoed behind him. He dared a glance back and wished he hadn't. The rake was chasing him, its body contorting unnaturally as it bounded after him. Its movements were jerky, almost insect-like, as it scuttled along the tops and sides of the train cars. David's lungs burned as he reached an old service building at the edge of the yard. He shoved the door open and slammed it shut behind him, barricading it with a rusted filing cabinet. His flashlight flickered. Then it went out. In the suffocating darkness, David could hear his own ragged breathing. Outside, the scraping began again. Claws on metal, slow, deliberate, as if the rake was savoring his fear. Then came the whisper again. This time, it spoke. "Why run?" David pressed himself against the wall, clutching a broken piece of pipe he had found on the floor. The scraping grew louder, moving across the roof above him. Suddenly, a crash shattered the ceiling. David looked up, and his flashlight briefly flickered back to life. The rake's face was inches from his own, peering through the opening it had made. Its black eyes locked onto his, and it smiled. The last thing David heard was his own scream, echoing through the cold, empty train yard. When investigators finally checked the area days later, they found no trace of David, only a pool of blood on the floor and deep claw marks etched into the walls, spelling one word: stay. No one dared visit the train yard again,